Back, everybody. We're going to keep working on this tutorial here. We're going to move on to part two, and in this particular section, we're going to work specifically with some of the CRUD operations and nuances of that. Um, just to kind of refresh you, if you're kind of new to watching this, there are a couple of videos that precede this that kind of lead us up to this, so that the first two videos cover the get started section. I'm hoping to get all of this particular part done in this video, hopefully. Just a reminder here that you can look at the completed code, and sometimes we do that, and they have a link up here at the top to the stuff up on GitHub, and you can look at it with the various different versions of .NET. This is being built on .NET 6 because that's what this tutorial was designed on, so we want to stay consistent to it. I know it says .NET 8 up there, but some of the packages and stuff are .NET 6 inside this project. The other thing that we do want to talk about here is the fact that we're not using an abstraction layer right now between the user interface and the data components. The point of it is because we are using Entity Framework Core to do this work, and that handles a lot of it. So we're adding those components directly to the model classes, and it kind of supersedes all that. The other thing that we're talking about here is that we are going to work now on updating the details page. And if you kind of remember in the previous tutorial, we worked basically on the create list areas, right? We got those working, so we were able to actually create a student, edit the student, and then delete them. And then finally, we were able to seed the database with a group of students. So that's where we're at currently. So now the focus goes to the details page. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to read the enrollments of a student. Now there is enrollment data already in the database, but we need to connect that up to the details page so it actually works and feeds in. So let's go ahead and fire Visual Studio. I did not have it started in advance here. I will bring up the app, which is called Contoso University. That's our solution file. As you can see, I have the SQL Server Object Explorer open on the side panel. I'm actually going to collapse it down for now. I'm also going to minimize my bottom panel here somewhat. And you can also see I have a whole bunch of stuff open that was left open from the last time I did this. And you know what? For the most part, that should be fine, right? They're all text files. All right, let's get to that page now. So that's Pages, Students, Details. And let's open that up. So Pages, Students, Details, which is already open. And then we're looking at the C# file behind it. So we want to expand the triangle here, click the C# file, and there is our code. Now we have a couple well, actually one change we need to make here. So in the async function here called onGetAsync, we are going to add this line of code. So let's copy that. That's going to go right below the first if statement. And I'm just making sure I'm looking at the same thing. And so I'm going to paste that in. And okay, so they're just showing us where to place it basically. And I'm thinking that this is being removed here. And you notice like the similarity of how this is, put in place. So we are going to remove that line. We need to collapse that down. And then I'm looking at that if statement that follows. That looks different too. And I'm tempted to change it, but I'm going to look at the code here. Actually, I think it's fine the way it is. All right. So if we run into problems, we'll adjust basically. Now it said, it says in addition here, and this is kind of interesting, right? And so I'm looking at the code really carefully. Replace the onGet async method with the following code to read enrollment data for the elected students. The changes are highlighted, and I thought I just did that. So like, okay, so thank you, Microsoft, for making it basically as confusing as possible. And I think what they're doing here, and you can see through a series of Lambda expressions right there, they're putting in the context with a little bit more depth following the format of the data structure, basically. So let's grab that student declaration there, copy it, and now we're going to replace this piece. So once again, I'm making sure that I'm not looking at like an overloaded method or something, but it seems to be the same exact method, correct? I mean, I'm not imagining this. So let's go ahead and paste that in. I think that is a little weird though. I don't know why they would tell us to put in one set of code and then tell us to do something else. Now, you are seeing that this is underlining now. So that has me a little concerned. And I think it's because we are not indicating. Okay, so I don't know if you guys are catching this, but the original variable was the lowercase s. This one was an uppercase s, so now we have to fix this. That takes care of the underlines. Let's do a control S to save. They start talking about why they're doing this a little bit. And they're going through and explaining how these methods are kind of put in place. The include the enrollments, then include the course, and then they're, you know, basically what they're doing is they're calling functions in place, right? And they're pulling the information from the context data of the students, and then kind of utilizing that. So they're explaining. This is kind of a weird one. It says, as no tracking method improves performance in scenarios where entities are returned and not updated in the current context. So they also talk about that later in the tutorial. All right, so it basically improves our performance. Right, well, then the next thing that we want to do is basically replace the code in the HTML file with the following code to display a list of enrollments. You can see they have some highlighted code here, so we want to proceed with this carefully. Let's get the file up on screen first. I thought we had that one already up there. There's the HTML file. We'll review the contents a little bit. Looks like the top is exactly the same. Then they start doing a div here with a bunch of DLs, DTs, and DDs, right? That all looks the same, and they go all the way down to basically the enrollment date thing. So column small 10 enrollment dates. Let's just see if that all matches up. Yep. And so basically we're going to be adding this code right below that point. Oops, I got a little select happy there. Let's take it all the way to there and copy it. And that's going to go right below the last DD in the code, which is this one. Just make sure we're still inside the definition list. We are. You know, how you nest it is important. I do want you to notice the little for each razor command here. And this is one of the powers of Razor, obviously, is you can add programmatic code right inside your HTML, so it can loop automatically and read in the data model and the enrollments with the course title and the grade, right? That's pretty powerful. All right. Let's make sure, let's do a save all because we've made a couple of changes here. So let's do that. And this does indicate here, it says it loops through the entries and enrollments in the navigation property. It displays the course title and grade, which I just said. And the course title is retrieved from the course entity that's stored in the course navigation property of the enrollment center. Got all that right? It's kind of a mouthful, right? They are asking us to run the app now, and select the student tab, click details for a student, and the list of courses and grades for the selected student is displayed. Let's see if that's really the case. So let's do, go back to Visual Studio here. We're going to do a Control F5 to launch. That's to launch without debugging. Looks like it's building, waiting for the browser to launch here. Go. And they wanted us to, of course, I forgot the instructions already. They wanted us to do what? Right. They want us to click the students tab and then click details for a student. All right, so we go to students and then, well, let's just pick somebody at random here. This guy's got an interesting name. All right, and you can see that it does have a course title with no grade and a course title with a grade. And so it seems to be working, right? So, and really what's happening here is we kind of have like a table inside of a table, right? Or if you will, right? So conceptually, that's kind of what's happening. But it makes sense, right? So like an individual student might have multiple courses and multiple things that they've earned grades for. So we can click on a few, right? And you can see this person's got more. Let's click on that one. That person has none. And I expect it's going to be like that. It's going to be a mix, right? So every student is different, but you can see that it is working. So those two pieces are tied together now. I am going to go ahead and close the browser window. You know what? I don't think I need to stop the web server. It'll repopulate if I relaunch. All right, let's move on then. And gosh, gotta make sure I'm looking at the right window here. All right. Now let's take a little bit of time to like kind of look at some of the stuff that they're doing here, because they're calling on methods and then not necessarily explaining why, and here they're starting to do a little bit of that, right? So here they're pointing out the fact that the auto-generated code uses this first or default async to read one entity. That returns null if nothing is found. Otherwise, it returns the first row found that satisfies the query filter criteria. So it's generally the better choice than these two other alternatives, and you can read why, right? Not that you wouldn't use these, but there's a reason why they're going to that one automatically, but there might be special circumstances where you do need to use those. So read up on that. Next thing that they're pointing out is that there's route data versus query string data. So like if you click on the details page, basically your URL will look something like this. So it's calling in, students, the details page, and then it's using this as a parameter, right? Because you're attaching to a certain student with a certain ID. And then that comes up. You can create a route. Now, I want you guys to remember in previous tutorials, we created some of this stuff so that instead of using like the get string with the question mark and an equal sign, you can just do it in kind of like URL fashion where it's details/1. But then you have to alter your code the same way we did in those other apps to make that happen. They're not doing that here. They're just pointing out the fact that you could. So some developers like that, so they do that approach. And they have links if you really want to walk that path. We're not doing that today. The other thing we're going to work on next here is the create page, and it says the scaffolded on post sync async code for the create page is vulnerable to over posting. And so they're asking us to replace in the CS file whatever is in there with the following code. So let's go take a look and see where we're at relative to this. So I am going to go to create, look at the CS file here. And let's take a look at that particular method. So this is the on post async method. I'm looking at the code here. I see we have one variable. We create a new student. Then we do an async await. and you can see all the little criteria there that they have, including a comment and then this code. I am copying this just in case I need to paste it in. And I'm not sure if yeah, we are changing this code. So, and notice how they have a little link to it here. So they have a link that explains how to fix it if you want to overpost, right? So we are putting in the fix basically. Okay, so they start to do a little more explanation on this over posting thing, and they explain how it works. And it basically what it does is it's only going to update the things that we need relative to what we're changing, and what it's looking for as it's doing the work. They're using this approach called model binding, and we haven't talked about that much in this class, but that is an important concept in .NET. And what that really does is it makes sure that the data that we're feeding in fits the data model that's set up so that it, doesn't crash or like works in the database, right? Because databases are finicky about the data that they receive. So now the objective is to run the app, create a student entity to test the create page to see if that still works. So let's go back. Let's make sure we do a save all. And then we're going to do Control F5. Let's build and launch. We'll go to students. We'll create new. And you know what? Let's just put one in for myself here. And just kind of pick a date. That's fine. Hit create. And there I am. Okay, so it seems that it's working okay. So in other words, the changes that we made are sticking. Now, if I click on details, of course, I have no courses. That is correct, right? I haven't entered any yet, so that is working well also. Now, their other little piece that they're pointing out here relative to overposting again is to basically update the fields with posted values is a security best practice because it does prevent overposting. Okay, obviously. So for example, suppose the student entity includes a secret property that this web page shouldn't update or add, right? So we don't want to see it on the page. Now, this seems like a weird thing to do, but it's not unusual on web to create hidden fields to pass around information or tokens or what have you relative to the app. One little thing I always used to do is like if I would do an e-commerce thing, I would hide like the dimensional size of a product or the weight of a product for shipping, right? It's there, but it's not necessarily showing to the customer. And that would help me with my shipping calculations unbeknownst to them, because it's not just weight, it's also size, right? But so in other words, creating a secret field. So what they want us to do then is to go to the student class file and add this secret field. And I'm not sure if we had done that already, but you know what? Not hard to check. And you can see it's not there. So we are going to yeah, and I think that actually I don't know if they're asking us to do this. Okay, so now this is where you got to read more carefully. Okay, so what they're pointing out is that if you did have a secret field, a hacker could use a tool such as Fiddler or write some JavaScript to post a secret form value. So in other words, they can intercept it just because it's being transported, right? So the user might not see it, but the data is still moving around with the right tools, right? So you can use a tool like this, or you can use the inspect tool, look at the network stuff, right? It'll show you the data that's moving around, including the secret stuff, which you may or may not want shown, right? And then hackers, of course, can utilize that information to their advantage. In some cases, that's kind of what they're pointing out. All right, so that's not something we actually need to do. They're just kind of pointing that out. So here they're saying that view models prevent an alternative way to prevent overposting. So this is kind of an interesting thought. The application model is often called the domain model. The domain model typically contains all the property required by the corresponding entity in the database. So in other words, the database might need that secret field, but the user might not. Okay. The view model contains only properties needed for the UI page, for example, the create page. All right. So what they're pointing out here is you could create a view model and allow that to control your UI, and it's separate from the model that controls the data in the database. All right, so they're just, and once again, I'm reading this as an example, and I'm not seeing anything that says code this. They're saying consider, right? So so in other words, you would create another model with a little extension on it, so you know it's a view model, and then this would then push out to the screen using, once again, the async thing, but we're just changing, what we're using, right? So we're using that model instead of the regular student model. The other thing is using the student view model requires that the create page uses student VM rather than student, right? So you would have to go in and alter all that code, right? So anything that's got student, it's got to change the student VM. You can do that with a find and replace, of course, and quickly update that. Okay, so that was an example of what you might want to do, right? And I think that really is good design, because sometimes there is information that's irrelevant to the user interface, and might make you susceptible to being hacked, or whatever. Not to mention that if you're moving less data around, it's more efficient, right? So that's the other aspect. Right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to update the edit page, and we are going to replace the on get async and the on post async methods with the ones that we see here. So let's go to edit CSHTML CS under students. So let's do that. So students, edit, and the CS file. And then we're going to replace those two methods. Let's do them one at a time. So I'm going to grab this code for the on get async, which is this one. There's the code. No underlines, wonderful. And then we have the on post async. And then this is the over posting prevention, basically. Once again, we are pasting that in. We are going to do a save on that. They're pointing out that this is basically the same thing we did on the create page. And what we're going to do now is we're going to test it again. So we're going to run the app, and we're going to create and edit a student. Okay, so let's do that. This is still running. I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, Control F5 to repropagate here, rebuild and redeploy. All right, so here's students. We're going to create a new one. There's Mickey Mouse. We're going to click into edit. Change the name to, is that how you spell it? I'm not really sure. Minnie Mouse. Save it, and it did change. Okay, so the edit is now working, and it looks like it's okay. Let's see if we can do details on it. We can go back to the list. Let's see if we can delete it even. Looks like we can do that too. So it seems like it's all working great. All right, moving on to the next part. Now we're going to talk about entity states. So for this next part, this is kind of interesting, because they kind of point out some things that, I would think that some of you already know about databases, but maybe this wasn't fully explained when you studied databases, or maybe it was, and maybe it didn't pay attention. I'm not really sure. But the whole point is that when you're working with a database, and then you're taking that data out of the database, throwing it in memory inside of an app, manipulating it, and then trying to write it back to the database, all those things. Um, that information uh, is basically tracked by the database context within Entity Framework Core, and it tries to basically keep the data in the app in sync with the data in the database. However, they can go to basically out of sync mode, and this is why we use some of these commands. So what they're trying to point out here is that as you're working with a database entry, that you could be in one of the following states. You either just added it, you didn't change it, you modified, but you haven't saved it back yet, or you've deleted it, or maybe the thing that you're working with isn't even in the database at all, but it's on your screen, which we would call that detached. Most of that kind of tracking normally in an OS is done kind of automatically. But the thing that's weird about a database is whenever you're working in a database and you're active on a record, that's not really written back to the database until you leave the field, right? And that's a thing that you should have learned. So this can cause some problems, right? So calling save changes, it says generates a SQL update statement that updates only the changed properties. And the thinking is we don't want to, the whole record is active, but we really only want to change, let's say, the phone number, right? So we would focus in on that. And what it does basically, the DB context, is it reads an entity, displays the data, and is disposed after a page is rendered. So in other words, it uses the data to put it on the screen and then it goes away, right? That's kind of strange. And then when you call these other methods, then a new request is made and you're doing a new instance of the data from the database. That's kind of weird, but it does make it a lot more, stable. It makes it a lot more similar to how things work on your regular computer system. And we kind of like think of it that way, but the web doesn't always work the same way that your local operating system does. All right, now we're moving on to this page here, which is update the delete page. And it says in this section, a custom error message is implemented when the call to save changes fails. So now we're going to replace the code in this CS file, so it's the delete file, with the following code. And you know what? That's a lot of code, so I'm gonna copy it rather than check it and just change the parts that are changed. I'm just gonna copy the whole thing, and let's go to delete the CS file. So this is delete, and I'm gonna grab the CS file. I'm gonna do Control A here. Oops, well, not there, but here. And then I'm gonna just paste in the new code. No red underlines, that's wonderful. And once again, we'll do a Control S to save. Now, they do go into a little bit of explanation here. So one of the things it does is it adds logging. So in other words, now we're starting to keep track of the transactions that are happening. Now, this is really, really common in data-driven apps because like if you're changing an entry, sometimes you're like, well, who changed that? When was it changed? When was the last update? That kind of thing. So that's helpful, right? Especially if you run into problems. It also adds some parameters here, to deal with errors and to deal with the async issue. There are a bunch of different things that can go wrong when you're interacting with data. And one thing that they're pointing out is that if you're deleting, that might fail. Let's say like your network connection goes down, you hit delete and then the network falters. So maybe it didn't even do it, right? So what this does is it helps overcome that problem and watches for this one parameter basically to be set to true to see if it worked or not, basically, and whether or not it stuck. Is a good way to look at it. All right. If the remove fails, it says the database exception is caught, delete pages is called, and then that message gets set to true. So what we're going to do now is on the delete page, the CS HTML page, we're going to add this paragraph here right below the H1. And basically, if there's an error, that error will populate into this razor variable, right? So, but it's not going to show otherwise, right? So let's copy that, and that's on the delete, and we are putting it right below the H1, and we are doing a Control S to save. Nothing else needs to happen here. So now it says run the app and delete a student to test the delete page. Let's try it and see if we're working. If it does work, the good news is we're done with this part of the tutorial. So let me get my Visual Studio here. Control F5. I did close the running tab if you didn't catch that. And so now we're going to go to a student. And then I think it is worthy of deleting myself. And hit the delete. Now, I didn't get an error message, but let's say, you know, and here's the thing, unlikely to get an error message because the web server and this database server are on the same machine as my IDE. But if I'm going over a network and the network hiccups, that could happen, right? And then you would have an error message that appears. We won't see that in the output, of course, because there's nothing to put, right? Only if the error happens. Right, I'm going to call this portion of the tutorial complete, and then we're going to move on to the sort filter page in group 1 next. All right, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.